Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for joining. How are you doing today? I trust that you're well. I'm going to be sharing my screen in a moment, as well as we are going to get started.
Hello, my sister.
Hello, my sister. How are you?
I'm good. And how are you?
Good. I know that beautiful voice. That's the beautiful voice from all the way from Botswana.
Yeah, you really know it.
Yes.
Today,
how are you?
It's not a good day for us. Brian had a test, so we didn't go to church. But he'll be fine. He's okay. He's fine.
Yes. He's definitely okay. Yeah, I understand. I'm sorry to hear. Yeah. Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
It should. Yeah, I can see now.
Okay. For some reason, I'm not able to share on YouTube. I'll have to upload it later. I tried it and I couldn't see my screen. I'm using my iPad. But all is well. All is well.
Yes.
Yeah, let me just stop sharing here and then I can hit the record button so I'll be able to retrieve it later. Yeah, if you have any questions to ask me, by all means, that's why I'm here, okay? We're just going to wait for other people to come in. I thought I took the admit one off.
Yeah.
Hello, my sister PG. Yes.
I've noticed that the problem with Brown is he suffers constipation, and he hasn't been able to go to the toilet for some few days now.
Okay.
And he told me that yesterday he wanted to go to the toilet, but it was hard. That's when I realized that this is what triggers the seizures.
Yeah, it's the toxins. It's the toxins coming back from the food back into the bloodstream. Yeah.
So I told them the medical missionary, so we're gonna work on that to control this constipation, to try and help me with this constipation.
Yes, absolutely. No, that's a great idea. And also, if every time somebody changes how they eat, it happens. Yeah. So prunes would help. So you'd get some prunes.
He has been on raw diet. He has been on raw diet. Yes. And he was doing better. He has shed some weight. He has lost a lot of weight. But I don't know what happened yesterday. But so far, it has been good.
Okay. Yeah. So even if the raw diet, somebody is taking a raw diet, they can still be constipated. They have to drink like water half their body weight.
Oh, okay.
Yes, water. And when it's hot, you need more water. And also, when you change how you eat, sometimes the body adjusts. So you might need a little bit of laxative or pineapple or something. Pineapple usually makes people go. And some papaya seeds, stuff like that. But I'm glad he's doing good.
Yeah, he's doing good. And he's very happy.
That's great. Hi, Sister PG.
Good evening, Dr. Stella and Sister Umpo. How are you both?
Doing wonderful.
You're good? Wonderful.
I'm good, sister. I'm good.
Excellent. Happy Sabbath, by the way.
Thank you. Happy Sabbath to you too.
Thank you.
Happy Sabbath to you
too.
Yes,
we are heading towards the end of the Sabbath. We are left with an hour to finish the Sabbath. Yes.
Okay. Where are you, Sister Umpo?
Botswana.
Oh, Botswana. All right. So you're a couple of hours ahead of us then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Are you able to see my screen?
No, not yet.
Yeah, it's been kind of slow, but I'm sharing a PowerPoint, just one slide I'm going to share with you today.
Okay.
And this is just the body systems. For some reason, this room has to put people in the waiting room. So when I share my screen, I don't always get to see them, but I will do my best to make sure. Oh, how about this? Let me assign one of you co-hosts. Who would like to do that for me?
I don't mind.
Oh, perfect. So I'll do that. If somebody wants to enter the room, you can just let them in. Because when I'm sharing my screen, I don't always see the waiting room, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yes. So I take it that you all had a wonderful week.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
That's great. No, that's very nice. That's very nice. Yeah, I had a great week too. And I was thinking about you all, and I was wondering, what are some of the health choices you're making? I had a privilege of having some conversations with a few people during the week who said, I really like the health message because it's making me realize that I'm delicate, that I'm soft inside. So I have to mind what I put inside me. And so I will allow you a few minutes to share if you have something to share, and then you will mute, and then we'll get started, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, what I can share is that I've decided to join Brian in the raw diet. So hopefully I'll be sharing some testimonies soon because Brian has lost a lot of weight. So I'm inspired. I feel I should join him.
That's great. That's great.
Yes.
It's good to make decisions which are wise.
Yes, definitely. Well, for myself, this week, my daughter and I, this is my youngest daughter, we decided to take a city break, a getaway. So we went away for a couple of days, and we went to a place called Bath Spa, which is in the UK. Unfortunately, on this occasion, we didn't get to have a spa, but we certainly toured the beautiful architecture around the city, and we just had a nice time.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So we took time out to distress, let's say.
That's wonderful. That's great. Thank you for sharing. I hope you took some beautiful pictures too, because those memories are so sweet when you look back and see how beautiful.
Absolutely, we did. I love old buildings. I love architecture. I think I was born in the wrong century because I just loved the old historical buildings, and we took loads of them.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. One of the days
is steeped in history, let me tell you. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yes. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Anybody else has anything to share about their health encounters the past week? Okay. Silence is golden. So we are going to talk today about this body which is fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm sure you can agree with me that as we continue these conversations, we are starting to see how everything in the body is connected. Every single thing is connected. Might not look like that, but when diseases sit in, especially when any virus or any bacteria or any fungi enters the bloodstream, it can end up anywhere in the body. There is no filter which stops these things like the coronavirus from circulating around your body once it's in the blood, which is why we see a lot of symptoms when people's condition is advancing or deteriorating. So I like this verse, 1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20, which reads, "What? Ye know not your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not of your own, for ye are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body, in your spirit, which are God's. So the reason why I wanted to share this verse is that it highlights in the body and in your spirit. We are spiritual beings first, though sometimes we think we are physical beings first, but we are spiritual beings first. And there is a direct connection between the body and the spirit, because the spirit without the body is no being, and the body without the spirit, there's also no life. So looking at this, then, when we start looking at the body systems, we begin to see that the body systems have both a biological, physiological, anatomical, and spiritual applications. So when I say biology, you all understand biology because we all did biology at some point. And most people started doing the cell biology of plants first, and then went to zoology, which was animals, and then went to the biology, which is the human being's body. However, anatomy and physiology is not always the language which most people talk about. Anatomy talks about the shapes of the different body parts and their names and where they are located. Physiology talks about how these body parts work. And so today we are saying, well, there are some spiritual applications to all this. So we'll talk about systems one at a time. We'll start first with that skeletal system, and I'll pause for your questions. The skeletal system is the system with the bones, the joints. That's the skeletal system, which is mainly the system which supports and protects the body and gives it its structure. So if you look at the human being, we're upright. If you look at a cat or a dog, they're kind of horizontal. If you look at a snake, it creeps on the ground. So the different frames of living organisms is defined by a skeletal system. So these are bones which also actually have energy in them, because the principles of God's laws are not only just moral laws, but we also have nature laws. So these bones have integrity, they have strength, they have a certain composition, which if that integrity and composition of those bones is not normal, we see diseases of the bones. That's why I'm talking like this. So this body structure has also ability to be resilient, to resist tension, to resist pressure, to resist aging to a certain extent. But we realize that when a body is malnourished or poorly nourished, this system also is challenged. That's why we have a lot of other diseases associated with the bones as well as joints. So there is a verse which was quoted here that they are never seen unless they are broken. That's a phrase. The verse is, and the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that he might preserve us alive, and that at this day, and it shall be our righteousness if we observe to do all these commandments before the Lord our God. He has commanded us. It's Deuteronomy 6:24-25. The authors of the book were making reference to the fact that God gave us laws in his book, holy book, word, the laws which govern our physical, our spiritual, and our well-being. So when we know that when bones are broken, it's not a good thing. You can barely walk with a broken bone. We also know that when the laws of God, the commandments of God are broken, it's also a challenge to walk uprightly. So I just want to pause here and answer all your questions regarding any condition you know which affects the bones. Unmute yourself and ask me questions if you have any questions.
How can a person walk with a broken bone without healed?
They cannot. If they walk with a broken bone, they will experience more pain and more damage, not just damage to the broken bone, but also to the inside of the bone, which contains bone marrow, which are cells which are responsible for producing good blood. So broken bones have to be healed. In most cases, when a bone is broken, it has to be put together through surgery. They connect it with pins and plates and rods and screws to make sure that it heals. And when that connection is formed surgically, the bone develops its own cells to build around that. So that's why orthopedic surgeons are among the highly paid surgeons in the world. Neurosurgeons and orthopedic surgeons are on the top list of most countries because there's too many people with broken bones and worn out joints, and they replace them and they fix them for us. And that is a needed service. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Most welcome. So whenever somebody has a broken bone, the way we know it's broken, most of the time, that body part is deformed, which means that it loses its shape. And also, they will do x-rays. An x-ray shows density of bone because bones are dense, skin, muscle, and everything else is not as dense. Light penetrates, and then radiographic images are formed. So looking at that, they can see a crack in the bone, a displaced bone, and so forth. However, there are times when you can't see it through an x-ray. Sometimes they have to do an MRI to read some of the broken bones, especially if the bones of the neck or the spine or the hand or the foot, because there's a lot of little bones and joints in there. So if somebody has fallen, for instance, or is in a bad accident, usually you want to make sure that you don't move them around until they are supported and lifted, because you could make a broken bone worse. So that's important. Also, I wanted to talk about how when a bone is broken, there are different types of bone breaks. In children, usually it's not a complete break. It's called a green stick fracture because the outside of the bones is soft, so it doesn't completely break through. So in adults, it can also be a break, which is just simple or complex or complicated, which means a bone can break on its own, but also a bone can break and then it can rip the muscles and the skin and everything else, the vessels and the nerves, because outside the bones are the tissues. That's what covers the bone structure. So different bone injuries needs different attention because we want to make sure that that person doesn't have complications or bones. So just that's why we avoid accidents, and people have to wear helmets if they ride bicycles or motorcycles, and if they are sitting in the car, they have to put their seatbelt on, because if there is an accident, bones can break, and there is no one telling how many bones can break and which ones can break. It can be any bones breaking at any time. So we see a lot of bone injuries or fractures, they're called fractures, in motor vehicle accidents and where there's trauma. So there are diseases of the bone also which are not associated with any accidents or any trauma, and they're pretty common. There's a lot of them as well. So we have diseases of the bones which affect the inside of the bone, which is the bone marrow, which can result in a lot of, sometimes it's associated with a lot of leukemias, cancers, and other blood disorders as well. We also have diseases of the bones which affects the joints itself, the end of the bones getting worn out. So one good example is a disease known as osteoarthritis, which means the ends of the bones which connect together to form joints are worn out. So the bone is rubbing bone on bone because the shield, which is a cartilage, is worn out. It happens a lot more now these days than ever, that a lot of people's hips and knees get worn out and they need a knee replacement. Hip replacement is very common in North America, where a lot of people get those hip and knee replacements quite a lot. And I also want to say that there are other diseases also, which not just in the joint, but in the bones structure itself. You can have diseases like sickle cell, which can affect the nature of the bones as well. And also the production of those red blood cells we talked about, which are deformed. So you can end up with people having other symptoms, which does not necessarily mean that the bone is broken, but the inside or the ends of the bones are affected. So therefore, it's very important to protect the joints, especially by maintaining a good weight, because most people who have extra weight tend to wear their knee joints quite a lot. It is also common with people who work very hard. Joints can be worn out. I also want to touch another condition which affects the joints, which is called rheumatoid arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis is autoimmune or inflammatory disease, which happens sometimes. It's got a certain factor which is present in that person's body, and sometimes it's aggravated by certain foods. And rheumatoid arthritis, not only does it affect the joints and the bones, it also affects the other soft tissue as well. So you have seen people who have like deformed fingers, which are pointing to one side in their hand, or their toes are pointing to one direction and they have a little bump on their toes. Sometimes rheumatoid arthritis affects the actual joint integrity. It's a very painful condition. It can be managed, not necessarily prevented. If it's extreme, it can be managed by how people eat, as well as other forms of medication out there, medicines which slow down the process. So with that being said, sometimes this rheumatoid arthritis exists with other conditions as well, which are autoimmune, which can cause some digestive problems, or some people have fatigue syndromes and so forth. So I just point this out because sometimes you are caring for a loved one and you see them, they have certain energy level or they don't feel good. Sometimes they are really not feeling good. And because they haven't had the right test done, you are not able to tell what's wrong with them. So people with rheumatoid arthritis can have pain in certain parts of the body, arms, legs, back, neck, which is not explained. They haven't fallen, they haven't, been hit by a car or fallen off a bike, but they're in pain. And they are not swollen or bleeding or anything. So usually rheumatologists are the specialists which deal with joint diseases, rheumatologists. So that person might have to see a rheumatologist, as well as probably see a hematologist, which is the specialist which looks at blood disorders. Because if it's affecting the insides of the bone marrow, like I said, then perhaps they also have a blood defect. And usually these two specialists will carry out extra tests to see what else could be going on in the body. And so in existence as well, existing with these rheumatoid arthritis kind of problems, there might be other systemic problems. And when I say systemic, means they're affecting other systems as well. So it could be maybe the hormonal level of that person, or maybe the growth of that child and so forth. But it's just good to know, so that when we come across people who don't really have a history of anything going wrong, but they are not well, to know that there could be something else going on. And it's good that they get that investigated into as well. So I'll pause at this moment and answer your questions regarding the skeletal system, which is the system of bones and joints. What are some of your questions for me?
Dr. Stella?
Yes.
If we followed the health diet from day one, say, could we avoid these kinds of diseases, do you think?
Some of them, yes. Most of them, yes. Most diseases which are chronically occurring, which develop over time, can be prevented. But there are some conditions which happen earlier on in life because people have certain factors in their body, which also environment makes it worse. And environment means where you live or how you live as well. Lifestyle makes a difference. But the complications can be minimized and avoided, yes, in most cases.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, but rheumatoid arthritis, the reason why I brought it up is because it's a progressive disease which gets worse with time. And there are some people who get it earlier on in life. I've seen some clients who literally tell me, I have rheumatoid arthritis, so I know what that is. And it's dictated early, and they are put on drugs which reduce the inflammation, and also they mind what they're eating. And you ask a very good question. In general, they usually say people with rheumatoid arthritis should limit tomatoes and bell peppers, like the green peppers. There's usually
nightshade.
Sorry?
Call it nightshade, is it?
Nightshade.
The nightshade foods. I think
yes.
tomato is supposed to be one of them.
Yes. So usually they can contribute to the increase in inflammation in these clients with patients with rheumatoid arthritis. And I've quite often heard people say that, and I've read it a couple of places as well. So with everything, really with every disease, there's food which promotes healing, and there's foods also which can make the condition worse.
Okay.
Yes, so when you really look at it differently, you want to limit foods which cause inflammation. There are certain elements in our food or certain types of food which makes the body swell up or get inflamed. So a lot of preservatives will definitely do that, and a lot of additives which can be found in a lot of extremely processed or well-preserved food can cause an increase in inflammation or also in irritation in the body systems. Depending on age as well, age is a factor. There are certain things we eat when we're young, we get away with it, but when you're elderly and getting a little older, your stomach can take it or your body is responding to it as well. And I also want to say at this point, allergies and allergens are also a factor. What people are allergic to and what triggers allergic reactions as well. What are some of the questions you have for me? Perfect. So on the slide, the next thing we are going to talk about is the circulatory system. The circulatory system is a system which circulates blood, and it's called also the cardiovascular system. So most of the time we never say circulatory, we say cardiovascular. And cardiologists are the specialists who handle complex cases to do with the cardiovascular system. And the cardiovascular system is composed of the heart and its blood vessels. So you can see on the image there, the heart is right there hidden in the chest. The heart is considered a vital organ, meaning that if it's not working right or it stops working, life ends. So the heart, the brain, and the lungs are usually made reference to as the vital organs, those three, though, because you can live without a bone, but you can't live without a heart. If the bone of the hand or a leg is defective, they could take it away and the person would live in a wheelchair for the rest of their lives without a leg. But they cannot do that to the heart. So that's why it's a vital organ which we cannot live without. And it is the main transporter. That's the main system which pushes things around, which carries blood everywhere to every cell. And the job of this heart has to continue. So in their book, Dr. Nancy and Duane McHenry makes reference to the heart being the job of the church, which provides the word to all over the world. And the job of the heart is to provide blood to all body parts. Therefore, they make reference to the fact that the Bible uses the word for heart to describe innermost feelings and desires, because this organ is located in the innermost protected place, surrounded by the rib cage, which gives it, protection, covered by the breastplate, which is also right in the front of the body. And so in their book, they wanted to make sure that people remember the relevance of the heart and how the heart is vital, and that what poisons the heart can actually cause a lot of damage to the body. So they made reference to remembering the commandments of God and being covered by the breastplate of righteousness of God. When you see the role of the heart in your body, then you realize that we appreciate what life is, because for most of you who are listening to me or watching this video, you have witnessed people passing on, passing away, when they get a flat line on their EKG, which is a machine which reads the electrical signals coming from the heart itself. And so when that line is flat, life is no more. And this is where it's relevant, therefore, to know that we have energy in our bodies, we have electricity in our bodies, because the way the heart functions, it beats according to a rhythm. This rhythm is inherent and it's been born. It's a rhythm which we get upon consummation, upon conception. And God created us with a rhythm. And that rhythm continues on until life is no more. So the heart is one of those last organs to go before life ends. Literally, you have the heart, the lungs, and the brain. So, but sometimes when the lungs are gone, people can still live on a machine supported by a ventilator, which is kind of like a breathing apparatus, and the heart is still beating. And sometimes the brain is out completely. People are brain dead, but they're still around because the heart is still beating. So to really technically think about it, that is the last thing to go before life ends. And we also know that when God created, he breathed in us the breath of life, and then the human being was a living being. And so you also are thinking, so without breathing, there is no life. Yes, there is no life. So if someone is on a ventilator, unless if they can breathe on their own, they'll stay on that ventilator. You often hear them make reference of the term pull the plug when life is ending and someone has no will to live, like no written documentation that they want to be sustained by a machine. They will say they are pulling the plug, meaning they are now shutting off the machine, which is breathing to that person. And we know that death is the next step. So I say this for a reason, because most people live and they don't have a will. So some people make decisions ahead of time that I don't want to be sustained by a machine. So they have a written document, which is called a living will, or they assign somebody who's a healthcare surrogate who makes decisions for them, but they put it in writing. So in other parts of the world, they call it a do not resuscitate order, DNR, meaning if somebody passes out, they don't want to be resuscitated, or they might have that order, which specifically say that in the event they've been resuscitated, they don't want to be sustained by machine. So they have no right to be putting that person on machine. So it's a good thing to have that in place, because sometimes when a person is not well, it puts a lot of burden on the family to make that decision whether to sustain them or not to sustain them. So I've known people who have lived on a life support for 2-3 years because they did not have a will in place and nobody could make the decisions for them. But the significance here is that the heart is crucial. So I'll pause for a moment and answer your question before I expand on how the heart works. Questions? Okay, so perfect. So here is the heart in the chest. Attached to the heart are arteries. Arteries is what carries blood away from the heart and goes to every single body part where there is an artery to deliver oxygen, nutrients, water, minerals, and of course, some glucose, blood sugar, which is coming from our food. So these arteries, it's important that they stay open. We did touch a little bit when we talked about how when the arteries are clogged, blood no longer flows right. So a lot of problems we see, diseases we see, is because blood is not flowing. So it's important to keep those arteries healthy and open. And that's why we recommend people to have physical activity, to be moving around, because that helps to keep the arteries open and prevents the buildup of plaque or cholesterol in the arteries. So you can envision this heart is pumping at a rhythm, as I mentioned. It's uninterrupted unless if you have a dysrhythmia or arrhythmia where it's offbeat a little bit, but otherwise it's ongoing. And it averages about 76, 78 beats per minute. Some people have lower, as low as 50. Some people as high as 130. I've seen some people at rest, but that's too high. But the average is usually 76, 78 for an average person. The lower it is, the fitter somebody is. So athletes tend to be lower. So blood is going. So when it goes to the tissue, blood exits the arteries into the cellular space, the tissue spaces, to feed those cells with what they need. And so on the periphery, in the tissue level, cell level, there is a connection which is really of the arteries and the veins. So it's called anastomosis, which is veins and venules, arteries and venules, arterioles and venules. So there is a connection with another set of vessels which bring the blood back to the heart, and those are called veins. So veins are carrying the blood back to the heart. And the reason why I'm saying this, because these veins are valves. They're valves which stop the blood from flowing backwards. That's what keeps blood flowing upwards from your legs all the way to your heart. And that's significant to a very important degree, because most people, those veins collapse early in life, especially if they're spending a lot of time on their feet. They have collapsed veins. So the lymphatic system kicks in, and you've seen people with legs which look like elephant legs. They call it elephantitis. It's very common. Also with people who have had surgery of their lymphatic vessels removed, or their lymph nodes removed after surgery in the groin or in the armpit. It happens in the arm and the leg as well. So a lot of people don't realize that those veins, which are valves, they need care as well. So you don't want them to be collapsing, because you end up with blood pooling in the legs. So the good thing is, for someone who's taking good care of themselves, these veins tend to last until life lasts. They don't really wear out that much. But most people who spend a lot of time standing on their feet probably need to have a compression stockings or something, because over time they'll fail. They'll fail, and then it overworks the other system, which is the lymphatic system I'll talk about shortly. So what's also significant is that when blood is not moving in the veins, it clots. So people end up with blood clots. Blood clots form in the deep veins of the legs. If those blood clots move to the heart, then you have a heart attack. If that blood clot moves to the brain, then you have a stroke. So it's important that people maintain a good also flow of blood. So these days we see a lot of people with thick blood. I just say thick blood, but really it's like their blood clots easily. So you will find a lot of people who are put on blood thinners or aspirin, blood thinners meaning Plavix or Coumadin, because their blood is thick that it can clot easily. So the way we eat these days is a determining factor. When people eat a lot of acidic food, they end up with a problem with forming blood clots. And that is a medical emergency, because once that clot dislodges, it's called an emboli, which can block, like I said, the heart arteries and cause a massive heart attack, or the arteries of the brain and cause a brain infarct or stroke. So I like to share this because most people don't understand that when you are eating green food, the food with the green color, that's a natural blood thinner. However, when a person is now on medication, they're not even supposed to be eating all that. So it becomes a catch-22 where you can't eat the greens, which help your blood to stay thin. And also you can't live without your medicine, which is keeping your blood thin. So most people who are put on blood thinners are on blood thinners for life. However, they have to be monitored also through blood testing to make sure that that blood is not too thin, because if the blood is too thin, that means the clotting time is delayed. So somebody could bleed to death if they get an injury, or they can have internal bleeds as well. So you'll find most adults in general are taking a baby aspirin 81 milligrams or regular aspirin, which is 325 milligrams, or they're taking Coumadin, Plavix, or the other ones as well, which they use for blood thinners, some stronger ones as well, because that is very important. They're trying to keep the heart also pumping effectively without having to pump against a lot of force. And so when you read like Ellen G. White's books, you will hear her say about the blood is sluggish. And I said she knew that this would be proven by science years later, because they talk about increased clotting time or increased platelets time or sticky cells. Different words are used for this, but all I'm just letting you know that blood has to flow, in other words, because if it's not flowing, either the heart has to overwork or clots form in the veins. And so even though the clots form in the veins, they can travel back to the heart and be pumped out by the heart into the arteries. So we tend to see clotting problems presenting itself on the other side, which means they've already gone through the heart and the heart has sent them out. So some people who have like chronic clot issues end up with filters being put in their groin, or they have to be put on heparin, bed rests for that to dissolve. And I know a lot of people who have this as an ongoing problem, who now have to take very, very strong blood thinners, which they can't really get off because they clot easily. And so it's usually my encouragement to those who are young and healthy, just eat your greens, make sure your blood stays thin naturally, because eating spinach and collard greens and kale and string beans and broccoli keeps the blood healthy. And Ellen G. White talks about the food which creates good blood. That's how she put it in her books. So I'll pause for a moment and take your questions regarding the cardiovascular system.
You said the food that cleanses blood. Can you name them again?
It's the food which is green color. So the best way to remember it is the green foods, like kale. Okay. I say collard greens, but it can be mustard greens. In other countries, they call it rape. In other countries, they call it chomalia or collards.
Yes.
And some people, they call it mustard greens. I've seen they call mustard greens here, but they call it tsunga in other countries. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, string beans. String beans is the tender beans before they get mature. Snap peas, the little peas, some people call them peas, they call them snap peas here. And the green colored foods, in other words, spinach, lettuce. Yes. But when people are on medication now, they can't eat that. That's what the biggest challenge is now. When somebody is already taking a blood thinner, they cannot be eating. They are prohibited by their doctors from eating that. Because when they eat that, the thinning of the blood is extreme. So these people have to have blood tests done. They call them PTINR. It's like prothrombin time, clotting time factor. Yeah, so they have to have them done. Sometimes it's once a week, sometimes it's twice a week. And then they adjust their medicines during that time. They usually give them a dosage where they tell them to take half or every other day, kind of they have a routine they use. It's not always common in developing countries. That's what I'm talking about, because most people probably die from the stroke before they even know that was the problem. Because we see a lot of strokes which happens to either to hemorrhage, which is bleeding, or from a clot. And most of the time, if they don't diagnose it, what caused it, most people don't get to know whether that stroke was because of a blood clot or it was because of a rupture, especially if they are where they have no facilities, because there's some people who live where there's only maybe a little clinic or they have nothing to go to. So that's why I'm highlighting this, because most people may not know even what their clotting time is or how their clotting factors are. But during blood work, that can be determined, but it's not routinely done for everyone. Like, I don't know what my clotting factors are because I never was on a blood thinner, but I know my clients who have to have that done on a weekly basis as well.
Doctor, is okra a good vegetable?
It's one of the best. When you grow some, send me some. Okra is a very good vegetable to eat. It's got green, it's got fiber, it's got minerals. Actually, every single thing which people plant is the best food. The best food is what comes from the ground. When you eat as close as you can to the ground, your body is balanced and your body is happy.
Thank you.
I wish I could grow it. I don't like it slimy, so I tend to steam some onions and tomatoes. Then I put it in there, I slice it long ways, and I put it in there. And I don't like it too slimy, but I love okra. I don't like to put soda in stuff. Some people put bicarbonate or soda in it. No, it's not probably the best way to cook it, but I know a lot of people in Africa cook it like that. Sorry? Go ahead. Okay, perfect. What are some of the questions you have for me? Okay, perfect. So while we're talking about the cardiovascular system, I have to talk about, yes, go ahead.
I think it was network. I didn't hear you.
Okay, go ahead. What did you say?
No, I was thinking that you break down.
Oh,
I think it's my network. It's my network.
Okay, understandable. Sorry about that. You can always go on YouTube and watch it because I'll post it on YouTube.
Thank you.
Welcome. I'll take your questions. Anytime you have questions, just ask me. Okay, so one of the things I have to talk about at this point is high blood pressure. What does all this mean in terms of the heart working? So remember, I mentioned that the blood pumps, the heart pumps the blood out. It goes through the arteries, right? So when we measure blood pressure, we are measuring pressure in the arteries and not the veins. So when you get that top reading of your blood pressure, which is usually 120 for most people who are healthy, if it's over 140, that's too high. So anything over 140 for the top number is called hypertensive, high blood pressure. And the bottom one, it should not be more than 90, 80, no more than 80. 140 over 80 is considered normal. They kind of change the numbers a little bit. And sometimes they have some normals for people of color. Sometimes they have normals for different ages. You find that in a lot of places that they might have things like that. But on average, you're talking about 120, 140 over 80, no more than that. So the top number is reading the pressure in the arteries when the blood is pumped out. The bottom one is indicating the pressure when the blood is coming back. So it's almost like that first one is the force, the other one is the return. And why is this significant? Because when those arteries are tiny or are blocked, pressure is going to go up. And when these arteries are blocked or tiny, the heart is going to work harder. And we discussed this before. So it will fail. So we have congestive heart failure, which is not heart disease, but it's congestive heart failure, which means the pump is failing. And we'll talk a little bit more in the future about it, but I just want you to bear in mind that there's a difference between coronary artery disease, which is what I talked about, when the arteries in the heart are getting clogged. That's when you get a heart attack and you can get a, chest pain, which is called angina. And then the other one is when the pump is failing to pump. The symptoms are not the same. The symptoms for coronary artery disease is chest pain or heart attack. And some people get a silent heart attack. They don't even know they had one. That means the heart muscle is dying slowly because it's not getting oxygen, because blood is not flowing. And that's why cholesterol is an enemy and not a friend. High cholesterol is an enemy because it clogs those tiny little arteries, and slowly, blood is not going and the heart dies. So a lot of people, I did not know that people would have 7 heart attacks and survive them, until I had a client about 20 years ago who said, oh, I just had my 7th heart attack. I'm like, 7th? You survived it? Because I know in Africa, when people have a massive heart attack, they don't survive it. Heart attack, period. Most people just die. So anyhow, why am I saying this? The symptoms of congestive heart failure is not chest pain. Sometimes it's swollen feet. Sometimes it's swollen hands. Sometimes it's change in the way the heart is beating. And sometimes it's difficulty in breathing, because congestive heart failure, as it sounds, congestive heart failure means that there is a sluggishness or the slowness in the pump working. So blood, because the heart is not pumping efficiently, blood is going to exit as fluid and be in other places. So people with congestive heart failure end up with a lot of breathing problems also. They can have what we call pulmonary edema, which means they have swelling happening around the lung area. So I just wanted to say that. So some people, they might have difficulty with breathing, shortness of breath, and they're coughing, and their hands are swollen, their hand is swollen, or their feet are swollen. Sometimes that's a sign of congestive heart failure. And most people would ignore it and ignore it and ignore it and ignore it, until now they're almost like a 20% ejection fraction, which means only 20% of the blood, and I'm using layman terms here, almost like 20% of the blood which is exiting the heart and going away to the body parts. So you might see symptoms like maybe tingling or pins and needles in the hand or feet, or maybe blue lips, or something like that. It's a sign that oxygen is lacking. That's a different problem from coronary artery disease, because coronary artery disease kills people. They get a heart attack. Congestive heart failure, you slowly deteriorate over time. You can't walk too far, so forth. So it's important that a person know these things, because the way we eat these days can easily result in congestive heart failure, especially when someone has constantly high blood pressure, which is high because the heart is having to work against a lot of resistance. Imagine the pressure is high in the arteries, and I'm the heart and I'm pumping blood. I'm having to work harder. So congestive heart failure is because the heart is being overworked. It's also associated with people who maintain a high body weight, and people who also have other lifestyle habits like drug use, as well as alcohol, smoking, stuff like that, because it's almost like the heart is struggling to do its job. It's also very common sometimes with people who are eating a high salt diet, high fat diet, stuff like that. That's why the lifestyle change programs are very important, because we want to keep the heart pumping. So in line with what I just said, I did talk to you about the clots which happen in the arteries, but I'm going to talk about clots which happens in the veins. Clots happens in the veins, and clots can happen when people travel. There's a significant amount of people who die every year from developing blood clots while on long flights. You can Google it, I'm sure you'll see. They don't always talk about it, but when a person is traveling like 10 hours, 12 hours, you can't sit still the whole 12 hours. When you're sitting still with your knees bent, your hip bent, you are not moving, you can get blood clots. They develop in the deep veins of the legs behind your calf there. And so it's important to get up and move. If you're riding for a long time, you need to pump your ankles a lot. You need to take a break and stop and walk around. The older you get, the higher risk you have of a blood clot. So a person can be eating normally and doing all kind of stuff, but if they're sitting still for too long, they can get a blood clot. I just wanted to bring that up. So you know, and also one other thing. So I did mention that when the heart pumps blood, it goes through the arteries, right? And so one other thing we see quite often is aneurysm. So an aneurysm is a bulge in the walls of the arteries, almost like the muscles, which we talked about last week, is now opening up, and the inside of the artery is bulging out. So aneurysm happen quite a lot. If that happens in the main aorta, which is the main artery which comes from the heart, it's really an aortic aneurysm. Sometimes it needs surgery to repair. Sometimes it's irreparable. So people sometimes die suddenly because they had an aneurysm in the main aorta and it burst and they bled to death. The aneurysm can also happen in the brain. It can also happen in the cardiac coronary arteries, which is the arteries of the heart. So if an aneurysm happens in the heart, you can have a heart attack. If an aneurysm happens in the brain, you can have a stroke. And why I'm saying this? Because one of the causes of strokes is due to aneurysm, because you can have a stroke due to a rupture of a vessel. So if that wall of that artery is weak and weak and weak, and the heart is still pumping, it ruptures. So that's why sometimes a person is doing fine and they just don't have their blood pressure medicines and they don't take it for days, and all of a sudden they get a stroke. Blood pressure was too high and you got a ruptured vessel, or they get a heart attack. So I just want to make sure that you are aware that if somebody's on blood pressure medication, they just can't quit their medicine, they can get a stroke also. So that's it about the circulatory system. The only thing I didn't talk about is peripheral vascular disease, which is a problem. That just means blood is not flowing very well to the legs. Usually affects the legs because the legs are very far from the heart, and also the legs are hanging all the time. So gravity makes it very hard for the blood to come back. So sometimes a person might not have a heart disease or coronary artery disease or congestive heart failure, but they can have a peripheral vascular problems, which means the arteries are clogged in the legs. So blood might not go to the legs. And in that case, you might end up with pain in the feet because it's lacking oxygen. And in that case, sometimes you might have pain when you walk in your legs. It's called claudication, which means you're walking, your muscles are asking for oxygen, but your arteries are not opening up to deliver oxygen. So pain would be associated with walking. When you stop, it stops. It's common. You can also have circulatory problems where the veins are not efficient. So it's called venous insufficiency, where the veins are not bringing the blood back up, so you swell. So we tend to see swelling associated with venous insufficiency and pain and toes turning black with arterial insufficiency. So blood might fail to go to the feet, or blood might fail to come up from the feet. And associated with that, if that person is diabetic, we tend to see neuropathy, which is they feel their leg feel like they're falling asleep, or they're not able to feel the ground when they are walking. And it's a complication with diabetes. And so to make matters worse, diabetes hardens those arteries. And diabetes makes those arteries get clogged because of that extra sugar and extra fat. So we see in diabetic patients even more bigger problems with everything I've talked about. And so when blood doesn't flow, tissue dies. So I don't say this to complicate lives for anyone, but I just want you to see now, because I know a lot of people say, oh, I don't like how my doctor treats me. It's not the doctor's fault. The doctor is doing their best. Doctors really take good care of patients, but sometimes patients don't see it. They don't see that they are presenting with complex situations. You have a lot of things going on, because if that person has congestive heart failure, that person needs a drug which is going to force the heart to work. But if that person has high blood pressure, that heart can only overwork so much. So you see what I'm saying? So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that when I share these messages, I'm not speaking against the medical profession. I'm not speaking against anything. I'm just talking about how fearfully and wonderfully made we are, that sometimes when one thing goes wrong, it affects the other. So they do studies to dictate all these things I talked about. So outside taking blood pressure, we also do labs to determine what's the cholesterol, the lipids, the triglycerides, and so forth, because they're trying to make sure there's no clogging going on anyway. However, if there's reason to do a Doppler study to see if blood is flowing well, they'll do a Doppler study or ultrasound for the legs. They'll do an EKG for the heart to see if the electrical signals are going well around the chambers of the heart, because the heart is 4 chambers, see if there's a block in the signal. They'll also do an echocardiogram to see if there's any incompetencies in the valves. So what I didn't tell you is the heart has 4 chambers, 2 on the right, 2 on the left. The ones on the bottom are called ventricles. The one on the left is thicker. It pumps blood out of the aorta into the rest of the body. The one on the right bottom is smaller. It pumps blood to the lungs. So what happens is blood from the heart leaves to go to everything body part, right? Through the arteries, through the left ventricle. And then from there, the blood has to come back through the veins. So when it comes back to the top chamber, and then it goes to the bottom chamber on the other side, and that side pumps it back to the lungs. From the lungs, it comes back, it goes to the top chamber of the left. The top chamber drops it down to the bottom chamber pumps it down. So it's a cycle, it never stops until somebody dies. So this cycle, therefore, is driven by an electric signal, which comes from a spot which is called the SA node, which is in one of the chambers. That's where the heart rhythm comes from, and it's God who put that there. So the pumping of the chambers, it happens based on the rhythm, which comes from this spot, which sends electrical signals in a cycle to the chamber so they can pump with a certain rhythm. So when the rhythm of the chambers is off, we see congestion as well. So that rhythm of the heart pumping, when also we eat certain foods, is higher. So for people who are caffeine drinkers or who take stimulants, they tend to have a higher heart rate. So you're thinking, oh, that means the heart is hardworking. Yes. So we do see people who got congestive heart failure, heart disease associated with drug use, and so forth as well, which has nothing to do with age-related or on eating healthy. So that's why a lot of things are banned. That's why you hear they ban anabolic steroids used by athletes. They're banned, the amphetamines and all that, because they tend to cause fatal damage to the heart. So to make things interesting is that also when the rhythm of the heart is not in sync, we see fluid build up in the lungs sometimes. We also see the heart chambers enlarged. So you've heard people, they say they have an enlarged heart. And that is significant in that once the chambers of the heart starts getting enlarged, or the walls of the heart get thicker, the pump is no longer going to pump the way it was meant to pump. So we have a problem. So we see a lot of people who are on heart transplant lists. We also see sometimes people use an external heart, which is in a little bag, seeing them while they wait for a heart transplant as well, because the heart is no longer pumping and it needs replaced. We also see a lot of people who can't walk too far because the heart is no longer ejecting as much blood as she should to go out the body part. So I'm just telling you these things because you might have a loved one. You got to make some decisions. These things happen, but sometimes lifestyle makes them worse. That's why I share these things with you. So they will also do an angiograph, and also do some stents and balloons to open up clogged arteries. So you know people who've had coronary artery bypass surgery, which means the surgeons are trying to create another way of getting blood to that part of the heart which is no longer getting blood, or they'll put stents in those coronary arteries to open them up, or balloons to open it up. But the best way to try and keep these arteries open is to adopt a healthy lifestyle early on in life. But it's never late. Anytime anybody can change how they live. So I think I've talked enough about the heart there. I need to hear your questions.
Dr. Stella?
Yes.
So people who are hypertensive, on hypertensive medication, the medics would have people believe that once you start on your medication, you cannot come off of it. In your opinion and experience, is this actually the case? Because I've heard otherwise, where people have changed their lifestyle and so they've been able to come off medication.
That's a beautiful question, and thank you for asking that. I'm going to answer it by saying, I have a friend, a co-worker, who went to their doctor one time and they were told your cholesterol is way in the 900s, it's too high, you need to lose weight. They went home and they lost weight. And next time they went to the doctor said, what's wrong with you? What happened to you? And they say to the doctor, well, you told me I needed to lose weight, so I started losing weight. And the doctor said, you're the first one of all my patients who've done what I told you to do. So I answered this with this statement because not everyone does what they're supposed to do. So for a doctor to really tell a patient that you're going to get off your medication is almost impossible, because most people I know don't change their eating habits or their lifestyle habits. Nevertheless, when a person's blood pressure is below, I want to say 90/50 or 100/50, I don't know any doctor in the world who would put that person on blood pressure medication, because they'll definitely be dizzy all the time and falling all the time. So we are coupled with the lifestyle change is what we call monitoring. So we do offer remote monitoring to make sure that our clients put in their blood pressure and we get to see it. Because definitely if somebody has low blood pressure, they probably cannot walk. They'll be clawing on the ground because they'll be collapsing, in other words, because the brain is way up here. And with low blood pressure, definitely blood is not going to flow to the brain. You see what my point is?
Yes.
So to anyone who argue the fact that my doctor is giving me this medication, I don't need it, I tend to say that person is not understanding why the doctor is putting them on medicine, because high blood pressure is known as a silent killer. We have no signs of knowing high blood pressure. There are some people who say, I know when my pressure is high, I feel, my lips are quivering or something. I've heard some people say that, but there's no universal symptoms of high blood pressure. We know some universal symptoms of high blood glucose and low blood glucose, which may vary from person to person. We also know that there are some symptoms of a heart attack to happen, but some people don't even know it's happening. Some people don't even have chest pains or arm pain, radiating arm pain down the legs. Some people can have some stomach queasiness and they get a heart attack. So my recommendations is to anyone who's taking blood pressure medication, get a monitor and log in your blood pressure. Because if you have a log of your blood pressure and you go to your doctor and say, this is what it was, and now I've lost 30 pounds, it's here, that doctor will have something to look at. But just hearing a patient's story that I'm changing my lifestyle is not sufficient enough for any practitioner to say I'm taking off your medication, because that doctor is putting themselves at risk. Because we know what people do when they go to birthday parties. We know what people do when they get paid. We know where people go for dinners and stuff. And most of the time, most of my clients will tell me my blood pressure was high. I know why. I went to a restaurant last night. My blood sugar was high. I know why. I ate 3 slices of cakes last night. So when we talk about self-management education, which is what we do, we help a person understand the symptoms, the consequences, and the reality. So the reality is most people I know, most adults I know, are on 3 blood pressure medicine or 4. The 4th one is a rescue drug. And I know, and some of them have been on them for a long time. And chances of the doctor taking you off your medication, if you've been on it for a long time, when nothing has changed, are very little, because that practitioner is putting themselves at risk liability-wise. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's
Yep.
each person has a responsibility to have the conversation with their doctor. And if they embark on a lifestyle change program, they need to track. So this doctor is really convinced that there's a change here. Otherwise, we would not be dying from chronic disease. We die more from chronic disease than anything else in this world. More people die every day, at least thousands a day from heart disease. At least maybe 1,200, maybe 1,300 here in the US daily from heart disease, perhaps more. I would have to look at the stats and tell you. And so with all this now, you're thinking, oh, so if blood is flowing, tissue will die? Yes. If blood is not flowing, tissue will die? Yes. Blood is flowing, tissue will live? Yes. And that's why we did that session last week. So you ask a very, very good question. So it becomes an individualized plan. Because the amount of salt each person eats varies from place to place, from person to person.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying? And so we know the consequences of somebody getting a stroke. It's very costly. And it's also has detrimental effects. They can end up not being able to walk, move their arm. We have to take them to rehab. So do we need a stroke or blood pressure medication? So every practitioner would make sure that none of their patients get a stroke. So I'm just saying that I'm not for or against drugs, but I'm saying they are much needed because most people would rather take a pill than change how they eat or how they live. It's easier than to walk or to cook a healthy meal because of the lifestyle. So it's a lifestyle change which is needed.
Yes. Thank you.
Most welcome. Yeah, I know some people whose doctors have taken them off their medicine and kept them on one and say, I need you to monitor and I need you to know. And sometimes they get a rescue drug, sometimes they get a mild pill. And I want to say this though before I stop talking about this. Perhaps that might help clarify the high blood pressure meds needs. So the blood pressure pills work kind of, I want to say 3 or 4 different ways, but I'll make it 3 so I don't complicate anything here. One drug class, which is usually the thiazides, they eliminate water. They make you go and urinate. It's called, they're diuretics. They cause diuresis, which means increased flow of urine. And usually that's your hydrochlorothiazide, or if you're on Lasix or furosemide, because that's making you get rid of the water. Because when you reduce the water, then blood pressure goes down. That's the rationale behind it. But we know water exists with salt. So giving somebody a diuretic and they're salting their food tremendously might not solve the problem. And we also know that most people have clogged arteries because they eat too much fatty food and fried foods and all that, and too much sugar. So they need another drug, which is, they're called peripheral vasodilators, the drugs which force the arteries to open up a little bit. That's how I can put it. Remember we talked about the smooth muscle last week? They act on that smooth muscle and try and force them to open up a little bit to accommodate a little bit more pressure. So we're literally telling these little arteries that, please relax. That's what it does. So this lisinoprils and all those, that drug class, that's what that does. So that's 2, right? Getting rid of water, telling the arteries to relax a little more so the pressure can go down. And then the other one is these 2 types, but I'll just talk about the beta blockers. There's calcium channel blockers and beta blockers, but these are blocking the muscles and the signals which make the heart pump. So some of those drugs are meant to slow down the heart. That's what they do. They slow down the heart. So if the heart is not beating as fast, then pressure will go down. So you find out that most people need a combination of those. And then you have on top of that, your rescue drugs, which in most cases are calcium channel blockers, can be considered rescue drugs. So most people would end up with 4. So the doctor will say, take this one once a day, take this one twice a day, And if your blood pressure is over 140, 150 over 90 or 100, take this one because it goes up there. So now if somebody's on all those drugs, how do you know which one to take them off first? Sometimes you don't. So so depending on now how old this person is, sometimes they need them because we got to keep them alive, So I just explained to you how these medicines work. So you're thinking, okay, so if I keep the arteries clear, it will lower the blood pressure. Yes, it does. So most of the time when people are on all those drugs, they now have to have a cholesterol drug on top of that too, because chances are they're going to probably continue to live the way they live, to eat the way they eat, and cholesterol is going to build up more over time. So let's try and keep those cholesterol broken down and eliminated. Remember when cholesterol clogs the arteries, it's solid. It's plaque. That's why they call it plaque. It's solid. Blocks the heart from flowing. And then when it blocks the blood from flowing, it also makes the clots around that solid material. So that person definitely has to take some blood thinner, some form of blood thinner, aspirin or baby aspirin, 81 milligrams in most cases. Most adults take those. So you're thinking, so movement and other things. That's why we support any lifestyle changes, and we do our best to guide people in those processes because it's a lifestyle change which is needed. And also education and bringing awareness is a plus. It helps a lot. When people know, they do their best.
Yes, you see, the reasoning as well behind my questioning is when time comes when people of God cannot buy or sell, what's going to happen to those who have these health challenges and need all this medication?
We'll have more strokes than we see now. I don't want to say they'll die. We'll have more problems. We already have more problems now with chronic diseases than we've had 30 years ago. So we'll have more younger generations with problems, more seniors with disabilities and stuff like that. We already see that in certain populations, certain communities. And so you bring a very valid point. Everybody has to strive to do their best now. It's a very valid point. And also there's certain foods which promotes good health, which people can adopt in a healthy lifestyles as well, is key. You just reminded me I needed to talk about God's pharmacy today. Forgot. Do it next week. Because there are certain foods which are known to help with the health of the body. And they do have, science have proven that, again, that a lot of foods help to keep us healthy. But sometimes we don't eat enough of them or we don't like them.
And those foods, can you just name a few of them?
Yes, I will.
Please.
I definitely will. I will name a few of them, and we still have about 40 minutes. I'll name a few of them. If there's anybody else with a question regarding the skeletal system and the cardiovascular system or circulatory system, and I'll name the foods for you after your questions. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to talk about the food. And so one thing I didn't talk about the heart is sometimes you have what they call arrhythmias or dysrhythmias, where the heart kind of like skips a little bit, or is racing and so forth. So we have other heart conditions like tachycardia. Tachycardia is when the heart rate is higher than normal, or bradycardia when it's slower than normal. But there are other conditions like ventricular tachycardia, VTAC, which is also an emergency. Sometimes people would really have to go to the hospital because the heart is pumping so hard, like you can almost see like it's gonna pop out of the chest, kind of thing. I had been in touch with some people who experience that quite often, like VTAC. So remember also that heart is a muscle. So each contraction should be smooth and easy. So sometimes when it's off a little bit, it's a problem. I'm just using the word off a little bit. And there's two more things I wanted to talk about. There are other conditions of the heart which exist in children. Children can be born with a septum which is not closed, which means the blood, the right and the left is communicating. Remember, the blood on the left is going to the lungs to get oxygen, and the blood on the right, is going to the heart, to the lungs on the right, and on the left, it's going away from the body with oxygen. So in babies, when they're in utero, the two sides are talking because the mother is supplying the oxygen. So there is a little hole which he has to close. And I think we were praying for someone's child not so long ago for that, because they do a surgery if it doesn't close. So that's common in children. However, in adults, there are valves. I told you about the two chambers, one on the right, two on the right, up, top and bottom. So between the top chamber and the bottom chamber, there are valves. These valves make sure blood doesn't go back up, because the muscles are pumping in a rhythm. This pumps, this goes, it's constant. So these valves can be incompetent, which means they are allowing blood to go upwards. So that can happen quite a lot with the valves on the left, which is also the valves which are sitting on the aorta, and the valves on the right as well. So sometimes people will have an enlarged top chamber, or they have blood pooling in the fluid pooling in their lungs because the valves are allowing a backflow. So they will do a valve replacement where they do surgery for that. So you've heard people going in for heart valve replacement. That's what that is. And then the other condition I wanted to talk about, I did mention that the heart has a rhythm which is inherent, which beats throughout life, though other things may alter the beating of the heart, which we'll talk about in future. When the rhythm of the heart is slow, sometimes we'll put a pacemaker. So a pacemaker is an electrical device which they plant in the chest right below the skin, and then attach the wires to the heart. And sometimes this pacemaker has a defibrillator. When the heart skips a beat or the heart is too slow, it kind of shocks it back into rhythm. So it's almost the same like the defibrillator, which you see at the airports and other places at the schools, which are used to do cardiopulmonary resuscitation when somebody is fainted or something. That thing they used to shock them. So you will find people with pacemakers. So with people with pacemakers, they're not supposed to go through MRIs. They cannot go through those airport readers thing. And also they certain things they cannot have machines with electricity attached to their bodies, with electrodes to the body, because it alters that rhythm. Just to let you know, in case somebody gets a pacemaker, it's very common for people to get a pacemaker, especially in the US when they're elderly. I know a lot of people who have them. They're implanted there. They used to have to open them and change the batteries, but now they have some way of recharging the batteries. They also have to be monitored. They used to have to go to a center, but now they have it. They do through the phone system now, and they check that pacemaker needs replacing or so forth. But I just wanted to let you know, so in case somebody has heart problem, they can get that pacemaker and it helps with the rhythm. So that's that part. So we do have about 30 minutes. So we will talk about the other two systems next week, because I don't want to give you too much and then you get overwhelmed on me. So let's talk about God's pharmacy after you ask me your questions. Anybody? Are you still there?
Sorry, I'm still here. Yes, I'm just looking. Yeah, I'm keeping up with you. Yes, I have no questions at this moment in time. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Yes. Yeah. So we talked about these two systems, the support system, and which kind of works with the movement system we are going to talk about next week. And we'll talk about the nervous system next week, and we'll talk about the lymphatic system and other systems inside us. So let's talk about God's pharmacy. So you bring a very valid point about, what happens when people don't have access. What happens when systems are no longer supplying. That's how I want to look at it. That there will come a time when the systems are not keeping up with the demand, or these other, reasons, like you say, the last days, when people can buy or sell, all those things. We are already seeing that in other parts of the world where people don't have access to medicines. I've seen people who spend about 15 to 20,000 US dollars on medication a year. I've seen people who take 22 pills every day.
Wow.
That's a lot. So you can imagine we have pharmacies. You have pharmacies who work 24/7 here, and they are constantly delivering now. It's a lot, yes. So those are some of the things to think about, that supply. It's needed.
Yes,
some
definitely.
people really need all of those. Sorry?
I said definitely it's something to think about.
Yes. All right, so let's talk about God's pharmacy. So they are people who did quite a lot of analysis and looked at a few things. They looked at the carrot. If you take a carrot and you cut it cross-sectionally, like you slicing it with slices, and you look at it, it looks like the eye of the human being. And scientists have proven that carrots have good nutrients to support vision. So carrots tend to be a good source of nutrients for the eye. And the next thing is the tomato. The tomato has 4 chambers and it's red in color. As I mentioned, the heart has 4 chambers and it also has blood, which is red in color. Scientists have proven that inside a tomato is a lot of nutrients which help to improve heart health, as well as a lot of components which also contribute to the well-being of the cardiovascular system. The next thing is the grapes, which hang in a cluster. They look like the lungs. They also do look like blood vessels when you look at them. They've also proven that in grapes is found a lot of nutrients which can help improve immunity as well as the well-being of the respiratory system. The next thing is I'm not going in order here. The next thing is the figs. Figs hang in twos and they do look like male testicles. They have proven that figs are very important for male fertility as well as the health of the male reproductive system. They have also looked at the avocado. When you cut an avocado, you see it has a seed and it looks like the female uterus, the womb, and they found out that there's hundreds and hundreds of nutrients which come from the avocado, which help nourish the female reproductive system. Then they also looked at walnuts. Walnuts look like the brain. When you look at a walnut, it has 2 sides, the right and the left side, and they've proven that walnuts are very good for the health of the brain. Olives do look like female ovaries, and science has proven that olives are indeed a good source of nutrients for the female reproductive system as well. Then kidney beans look like the kidneys, and they are located at the back of our lower back. And science have proven that the kidney beans have actually a good source of nutrients to nourish kidneys. And I believe I'll talk about 2 or 3 more. The other one is garlic and onion, which has been proved to be very helpful for immunity, building white blood cells, as well as boosting immunity. Then oranges and grapefruits. When you cut an orange and a grapefruit, it looks like the female breasts. The science have proved that citruses and so forth can help to boost the immunity of female reproductive parts, especially the breast health. Now I'll talk about one last one, which is the sweet potato. Sweet potatoes do look like a pancreas, and scientists have proved that the sweet potatoes can help with improving the health of the human being by blood glucose, or the glycemic index of a potato is actually lower than some of the starches which people eat, especially if they're diabetic. So those are some of the things. Somebody else who's anonymous did come up with that years ago, but science has proven. So the shapes of some of the foods we eat. I'm also familiar with some herbalists who, when they look at leaves, they know what it cures. My understanding is that's how most of them are functioning. They are able to know what works for what based on some of the way these plants are, and also the way they look, and by reading, of course, literature which surrounds us everywhere these days. So those are some of the examples.
Lovely, thank you.
Yes. Most welcome. Any questions, any thoughts, anything we need to clarify?
Yeah, going back to carrots, I mean, people always speak about carrots and that it's good for the eyes, it helps you to see in the dark. But I've read somewhere where carrots are hybrids, so that they're not exactly natural, they've been manufactured. Have you heard that?
I have heard that too.
I
have heard that too. And my take on it, I know that carrots have beta carotene. I've heard that. However, most of the food we eat could be manufactured, but I think if you are eating good carrots, you can just enjoy them. That's what I say. I mean, we have quite other food groups which are some people say they are plastic, they are no longer what they used to. I mean, there's a lot of talk among specific food. I mean, people speak of corn in a different way these days. I mean, it's all over YouTube and other places. But I think before I can do away with the carrot, I'll do away with the carrot cake. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, because to me, the carrot cake is kind of too processed. But at least if I eat the carrot, there's some vitamins in there if it came from the ground.
Yes.
You know, but I've heard what you're saying, and I have no opinion on specific foods like that.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So sorry, somebody else is speaking?
No. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So any questions on how you're going to take care of your heart, how you plan to take care of this precious heart? Any thoughts?
Any thoughts? Well, do you know, I know what I personally should be doing. I know I should be eating healthier. I do eat healthy, but then I do intersperse it with junk food. I know that. I also know I need to increase my water intake. I do drink throughout the day, but not enough. And I also know what I'm guilty of is not exercising regularly. And I used to always go for walks religiously every day. I've kind of cut back on that, and I know I need to reinstate it. So I know what's good for me. It's just that I am not practicing it as I should be. So my plan is to, all those things I've cited, to take them on board and to be more diligent in my actions.
That's a good one. I like that plan. And I'm listening to you, and I'm hearing the voice of someone who I spoke to this week, who said, I wish I just could do what I need to do. And I was talking to someone else who said, well, the problem is changing is hard. And so I've thought about that. That's why we do offer lifestyle change coaching services, because we realize that change, it takes place at different paces for everyone. And so the fact that at least you're listening, you're having the conversation, you are trying to connect with the information is a plus. We find that people sometimes act like it's not happening until they're in a crisis now and they are looking for quick solutions, because some of these things we're talking about can result in big problems. Somebody getting a stroke suddenly in their 60 or 50, it's kind of devastating. And that's the conversation I was having with someone this week, that if anything, if people can't be mindful of their health, they got to nurture their relationships, because you're going to need somebody to take you to the hospital, to be there with you. So we cannot be neglecting our health and neglecting our relationships at the same time, because it's given that this body will be challenged at some point. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to mute for a moment. Somebody's at the door, Sister Stella, Dr. Stella. Bear with me, please.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with questions for me? Okay. Silence is golden. So before we close, we are just going to recap on what we talked about today. We talked about the skeletal system, which offers the support, and that's the bones and the joints of our bodies, which keeps us upright, which also help us to move with the help of the muscles, which we'll cover next week. We've talked about the heart, that the heart is very important, and that this heart is what transports things throughout the body. It's just the heart which helps nourish our body. We also talk about how it's important to keep this pump healthy and moving so that blood can be circulating. And we did talk about how this heart is at the core, at the center. And I want to make reference of the book, John 14, 1 verse 14. John 1 verse 14 reads, "And the word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." John 1:14. Also want to talk about the nutrients. The nutrients in the blood come from the digestive system. And when we look at several passages in the Bible, they make reference to how we should attend to the words. "My son, attend to my words. Incline thine ear unto my sayings. Let them not depart from thine eyes. Keep them in the midst of thine heart, for they are life unto those that find them, and health to all their flesh. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life." Proverbs 4, verse 20 to 23. "For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the souls." Leviticus 17, verse 11. "Go ye into the world and preach the gospel." Mark 16, verse 15. The job of God's church is to provide the word to all the world. The job of the heart is to provide the blood to all the body parts. From the beginning, God has wrought through his people to bring the blessings to the world. The ancient Egyptians nation, God made Joseph a fountain of life. To the ancient Egyptian nation, God made Joseph a fountain of life. Through the integrity of Joseph, the life of the nation was preserved. Through Daniel, God saved the life of those wise men of Babylon. And these deliverances are an object lesson offered to the world through the connection with God, who was with Joseph and Daniel, who Joseph and Daniel worshipped. In order to have good health, we must have good blood, for the blood is in the current of life. It repairs waste and nourishes the body. When supplied with the proper food and elements, when cleansed and vitalized by contact with pure air, blood carries life and vigor to every body system. The more perfect the circulation, the better would this work be accomplished. At every pulsation of the heart, the blood should make its way quickly and easily to all body parts. Its circulation should not be hindered by tight clothing or bands, or by insufficient clothing or extremities. Whatever hinders the circulation forces the blood back to the vital organs, producing congestion. So we know that sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water is needed for life of plants. In order for us to have good blood, we must breathe well. So taking a full, deep inspiration of pure air, which fills the lungs with oxygen and purifies the blood, the lungs impart that to the blood in a bright color and sends it a life-giving current to every body part. A good breath respiration soothes the nerves, stimulates the appetite, and renders digestion more perfect and induces sound, refreshing sleep. The heart, together with its vessels, takes shape and begins to function longer before any other organ in conception. The heart begins beating in the human embryo during the 4th week of development and continues throughout the life of a person at a rate of average about 70 beats plus a minute. 100,000 times a day, the heart beats 100,000 times a day, about 2.5 liters. And during a 70-year lifetime, this heart is beating. This specialized cardiac tissue performs extremely a profound work. The heart is held in a place by connective tissue, which we talked about last week. And good nutrition helps to keep the heart healthy. And we know that we've talked about the conditions of the heart. The good thing is we, as Seventh-day Adventists, we were given the health message. And we acknowledge the fact that we are members of the church, and that if we have to share with these messages with other people, it's important that they know too that God is a healer. And it's important also that we acknowledge the fact that in the book of Revelation, God makes reference of the Laodicean state. They rich and increase with goods, and they have need for nothing. Revelation 3:17. They do not know that they are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. This is why they need the Lord. That's Isaiah 58. So God is calling us to a place where we can embrace this health message, know what it is and what it's not. It begins by gaining a deeper understanding of who we are and how fearfully and wonderfully made we are. I'll take your questions at this point before we close. Thank you. Any more questions for me?
Anyone?
Okay, so I am going to stop sharing my screen, and then we will end the broadcast. Unless if someone has questions for me, I'll be happy to take your questions.
Not from me. Thank you, Dr. Sala. It's been most informative. Thank you.
Perfect. Please come next week. Bring your questions. Any question you want to ask me, I'll do my best to answer it truthfully.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you. Same to you. God bless.